Good morning. This is today's challenge and it's going to be a little bit tricky. Let me explain why. We've got some telephone wires that run through it, but I think most of the crown is beneath. We've also got fence panels, a wall, and a driveway to avoid here. That's not too much of a problem. It's also starting to snow, so it's going to be a fun day. The reason why it's going to be challenging is the fact that it's got no central anchor point. Normally there'd be a branch going right up the middle of the tree that I could put my rope on, and then I can come out at an angle to these branches and nibble away at them slowly and get them down in small bits. But because there's no central anchor point, I'm going to have to be crawling across these on my belly, and it's going to be an interesting one. Let's get started. All of my work these days is as a freelance climber, so I work for a few local companies who I work well with, and they get me in on some of the more challenging jobs, which I find really rewarding. You never know what you're going to be facing, and it could be all sorts of things. The first thing I need to do is make a bit of room, so I'll clear some space here. This job was for Alan from ARB Tree Services. I've known Alan and Sean at ARB for 10 years. Yeah, just coming up to 10 years. And I like working with Alan. He's a good guy, knows his stuff, and it's kind of strange because I've worked for a lot of people over the years, and normally after working with somebody for about 2 or 3 years, we have our differences and I move on, or they move on from me and no longer in my services. But with Alan and Sean, it's been a good working relationship for 10 years, and the work we do is interesting, like this pine tree. Canopy on here is so dense, just got to cut into it. It's kind of a case of doing the simplest and easiest stuff first and picking away at the smaller branches and seeing what's left. It's so congested, I don't know what I'm cutting into at times. I'm doing it by feel a lot of times because I can't really see, because the pine needles and everything's so dense. I'm just putting my chainsaw in there, and I know I'm just cutting through small diameter stuff because the thicker stuff would feel differently. It's not as springy, it takes longer to cut through, you got more resistance there, and I know my ropes are well out of the way, so there's no chance of me cutting my ropes. So it's just picking away at it and making it more manageable, getting rid of the small easy stuff, and then the bigger stuff underneath, just dealing with that as and when I uncover it. So even with like a fairly simple tree, nothing really, I was going to say nothing really goes to plan. It's not that it doesn't go to plan. Your plan changes throughout the day, and with more complex trees like this, it's more of a case of just having a constantly evolving plan and just doing a little bit and seeing what that reveals, and then just taking the next step. So with this branches over the drive, I can't afford to cut anything too big off because there's a risk that it might fall and damage the drive, particularly with the larger timbers underneath. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it is just a case of picking away at the smaller stuff, revealing the slightly larger stuff, and then picking that out of the mix as well. Just getting it down in pieces that, you know, if they do fall, they're not going to do any damage. They're not going to put a big hole in the tarmac drive. They're not going to swing uncontrollably and hit somebody on the ground, or you know, any number of things could happen. It's just being sensible, taking it a little bit at a time and just cutting it up. It is a little bit annoying for the groundies, I guess. I've been there, you know, a lot of little bits is more difficult and more time consuming to pick up. Ideally on the ground you just want one big bit that you can manage and take to the chipper and put through in one piece. But with this, because of how convoluted the branches were, it's just not possible to do that. It all had to come down in tiny little bits. Luckily it's on the front, so it wasn't too far to the chipper. Just scoop up a handful of brash on the ground and feed it through the chipper. So with a tree like this, because I haven't got a central anchor point and everything else, it's probably a bit difficult to get the orientation of where I am, but I'm directly over the drive now. I'm standing on some branches, the thicker branches underneath, and just trying to pick away at this thin stuff that's on the top. and you can see the stem there by Alan on the ground. So I am some way away from the stem here. I probably would have had a better view of what's going on from underneath, or the guys on the ground had a better view of what I was cutting, just because, you know, the canopy is so dense. I've never known a tree like this really. Not been so flat. It'd be interesting to know what happened to it many years ago. To maybe it was topped out and it just went sideways instead of growing up. Feels like we're getting somewhere now. Feels like we're getting somewhere. I've revealed the scaffold branches on the one side, so I know what I'm working with. Normally Scots pines like this, you know, they're quite tall and open canopies. I think the customer just got fed up with this tree, of having it and all the pine needles dropping on the car and on the garden consistently. And there's that many dead needles contained within the canopy, just like nested in there. Every time the wind blows, just a whole bunch of needles will drop out. So that darker coloured timber there is where a branch is split. So you've got one bit, the bigger bit, that goes off to the right, but then you've got the other bit at the top and that goes towards the main stem. So you can kind of imagine that if you've got a number of splits like this where the branches just go in right angles in different directions, how you can go from a uniform canopy structure to quite a convoluted one with all these breaks and splits and turns in them. So because this is quite a big lump of timber, I mean it's not huge but it's big enough, and it's quite a complex shape, so it'd be hard to judge how it would fall and land. I decided to put a rope on it and lower it off. Obviously we've got the rope there, and normally I'd use a pulley as well, but because of the nature of the tree and I'd have constantly moving pulley points, I decided just to put the rope over the branch. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some people might frown upon it, but using a natural crotch or natural branch to rig off, I think that's perfectly acceptable, particularly on a tree like this where you're kind of moving all over the place and you don't really have a plan of how you're going to rig it off. It's all kind of just done by the seat of your pants. I don't know if that's a good term to use for tree surgery, I don't know. Basically I'm making it up as I go along. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just cutting bits off and hoping for the best. Just have to be careful with this stone line. So sometimes you'll be in a tree and you'll see an egg or something like that, and you have to stop work. But that's the first time I've seen a rugby egg in a tree. That was a bad joke, wasn't it? Yeah. You can just see how dense those dead pine needles are there. They're just like, every time the wind blows, I can imagine them just dropping in the thousands on whatever's beneath them. In some ways, I think we should retain as many trees as possible. And even though I enjoy the work of removing trees more than anything else, I don't like removing trees. I would rather them stay there, but it is part of my job. I have to do it, and part of the challenge of getting problematic trees out is what makes my job interesting. But also, to balance that, I think sometimes trees have had their day they only have finite lifespans, so at some point they have to be removed or maintained. And trees like this, they are a benefit to the environment, but they become a hindrance and a burden to the people who own and have to look after them. So for example, this tree is also doing some damage to the drive, so that needs to be looked after. And you know, it's kind of weighing up a balance of, is it worth keeping this tree anymore, or am I better at getting rid of it and replanting something else? And I would always encourage customers to replant. I don't really know why I rigged this off. I think it was because I wasn't really sure which way it was going to go, and I thought, well, it's better to rig it off and get it out of the way than risk it bouncing all over the place. And then similar with this, because it was such an unusual shape piece, as a lot of this tree is, it just made more sense to rig it off in a bigger bit than try and rustle it down in a couple of smaller pieces. So the canopy kind of changed over the garden side of it. I don't know if it had been treated differently in the past, but whereas over the drive it was kind of layered upon layer, and it was difficult to see what was on top of what. This seemed a bit more open and was only kind of one layer of branches, maybe two, but it was easier to see what I was doing. So I decided to lower this bit off in one big bit. I was wondering which way it was going to go and what was going to happen, but we managed to get it down, and just in time for tea and biscuits. The way to a tree surgeon's heart is to bring them sweets. Well, any tradesman, I guess, just bring them hot drinks and biscuits. And by that point we were getting there. We were starting to make a good deal of progress, but we still had a long way to go. But you know, the branches were coming down big now. We were lowering stuff off, so we were making good progress. I find the easiest knot to tie when I'm rigging anything off is a running bowline. I use the bowline for a lot of things. I find it easy to tie, and being a bit of a slip knot, it tightens up around the branch and it's fairly easy to move. You can tie it close to you and then move it away. You can throw the rope through a fork and then pull a bit of slack through, tie your knot and then pull it tight. There's only two knots that I use when I'm rigging, and that's a timber hitch, which you will see later, or a running bowline. And then it snowed. Oh my god, the snow and the wind, and it just, oh my god, what a tree, what a day. But yeah, most of the stuff over the garden we lowered off. It just seemed to make more sense, and it was coming down quicker. And also we had the fences and hedgerows and things like that we didn't want to avoid. We didn't want to hit. So on this branch, for example, I'm putting a face cut into the front of it to try and give it a bit of a direction, so the branch will fall away. Whichever way that face is pointing, the branch will fall that way. Sometimes I'll just cut straight through the branch, other times I'll do a step cut. It just kind of depends what I'm trying to achieve and how I want it to fall. The risk is if you cut straight through it, you might get a tear, but as the tree's coming down, that doesn't really matter. It only really matters on a reduction where you are close to your finishing pruning cut. The snow really started to come down, and all that stuff that's coming off the branches now is snow. So again, another running bowline, and I've already put the face cut in that's underneath the branch, and then I had the rope across the face, so when I put the back cut in, which I'm doing now, it's away from the rope. And then because there's so much weight on that, because it was a lateral branch, it just popped off. Yay! Yeah, food time. And this has gone better than I thought, actually. It looks gnarly as it is. That is not pretty at all, but it's coming down. Just stop for a bite to eat. Yeah, it's gone easier than I thought. Just nibbling away at it. It was so dense, the inner crown. I had a bit of difficulty getting in there. I just had to cut smaller branches to make a bit of a space and see what I'm working with. And the snow's getting, I think it's getting worse. There are patches of blue about. What a day! And if you've got any questions about what I'm doing, then just drop me a little comment below. And while you're there, if you like the video, give me a like, that'd be great. And please feel free to subscribe. I'd love to have you on board as a subscriber. To this point, the sun came out, which was great, and it was just log left. All the branches had gone. We just needed to lower down these logs. And again, because the structure of the tree was so complicated, it wasn't really straight timber. I just thought it was a little easier to lower all of this stuff down. And I'd left enough pegs to wrap ropes around and didn't need a pulley. Good job really, because I'd have just been moving the pulley endlessly left, right and centre all over the place, just to take advantage of the canopy structure. Is any of this making sense? I hope it is. So there wasn't quite enough weight on that to break the hinge timber, so I just had to nibble away at the hinge with a saw, and then it drops away from me, which is what you want really. You want the timber to drop away from you. The last thing you want is to have timber swinging towards you. That is scary when that happens. And this was the bit I was dreading the most, because it kind of went away and then turned back on itself at a right angle. I know how difficult branches can be like this sometimes. If a branch is straight, it's quite easy, you just knock bits off and coming back, but because this came back on itself, I just looked at it and thought, how am I going to deal with this? It's a bit of a nightmare really, but just getting stuck into it came off a treat. So I'd knocked a bit of the top timber off to make room for my saw. I'd put a back cut in, and then I just decided to cut it off with a step cut. So I'd already done the one bit, put the rope around, and now I'm just doing the back cuts. You may be thinking, why is Sean dragging the branch all the way over there? But it is easier to move the branch while it's supported by the rope than it is to try and move it when it's unsupported. So it just made more sense to get the log closer to where you need it to be. So this is a timber hitch. You just kind of make a loop and then wrap the rope around itself quite a few times. You want at least 4, but as many as possible, and then a half hitch as well. And these two work well together on timber that's really straight or smooth, where you don't have a fork to wrap it around. And with that peg to the left of me, I know the rope wasn't going anywhere. In fact, you can see I've wrapped it around just to give it a bit more friction for Al on the ground. It wasn't a huge piece, but with that extra bit of friction, it just made sure it wasn't going to go hurtling towards the ground uncontrollably. And I think this was one of the last big bits that I lowered off. You can see all the splitting of the timber there, where the timber's cracked under the weight. You know, that bit was going over the drive, and you've got these lateral cracks on the top. And that's just, you know, from the weight of snow or wind, or the weight of the branch itself over the years. It's just caused that damage, which isn't a good sign really, particularly if you're parking a car underneath it. This was quite a big lump of timber actually, and I've positioned myself on the opposite side, so I knew when I cut through the timber it was going to be away from me. I think that's always important. Make sure the timber is going to fall away from you. You don't want big lumps of timber flying towards you under any circumstances. I've had a few nasty calls actually over the years where timbers come flying towards my legs and I've had to jump out of the way. That was more when I had my own business and I had inexperienced guys on the ground. You know, I've got the bigger saw now, but it's still kind of the same philosophy. Just cut it off into smaller, manageable bits. And this last bit was so gnarly. I was glad to get that off. And then from here on down, it's just a stick, and dealing with a standing lump of timber, a stick such as this, that's kind of just everyday stuff for most tree surgeons. You just cut a slice off the top, drop that to the floor, drop yourself down a little bit, cut off another slice, and repeat. It's as simple as that. Cut a slice, drop it, move down, cut another slice, drop it, cut, slice, repeat, cut, slice, repeat. And then we're on the ground and the tree is done. We've just got the stump grinding to do. And there we are, tree's gone. Didn't go too bad in the end. I was a little bit worried at the start about how leaning branches, vertical branches, because you haven't got that central anchor point above you, getting out can be quite tricky, but the way it had grown, because it's so dense, it wasn't too bad. Started cutting holes, got it down, done and dusted, and all the snow's melted too, which is good, makes tidying up a little bit easier. And yeah, I'm off now because my hands are freezing. I'm off to go and have a nice warm cup of tea and warm up, defrost. But there's nothing like being outdoors. I am grateful for that. Trees are about the only thing I can climb at the moment. But yeah, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you'd like to join it, just press that subscribe button below, and I'll be doing more videos like this. And then once we can climb rocks again in the future, I'll be doing some rock climbing and hill walking videos, so it'd be great to have you on board on that. I'm getting all tongue tied, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.